Joining us now with that on the table, Bernie Sanders, chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. Senator, thanks for being with us. Where do negotiations stand right now?
Well, I think that what will likely happen tomorrow, Anderson, I can't be sure, is that the bipartisan infrastructure bill will not succeed. And that's what I think is the right thing, and I support the progressives in the House for doing that. And the reason is that what the president campaigned on, what the president wants, what the American people want, what 95% of the members of the Democratic caucus in the House and the Senate want, are two major pieces of legislation. And that is to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, very important. But what is even more important to my mind is to finally address the long neglected needs of working families all over this country and tell them that Congress is listening to their needs and not just the billionaires and campaign contributors. And secondly, deal with the existential threat of climate change. We have got to do that. So I think if the legislation tomorrow is defeated, I think it will open up the opportunity for some serious discussion to go forward so that we can pass both of these very important bills.
So just explain that, because it's confusing, I think, for a lot of folks who happen to follow this. You support that bill that you think should go down tomorrow.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit crazy. That's right. I voted for it. I'm a former mayor. I know how important roads and bridges and sewer systems are. We need to do it. But the problem is, if we pass that bill tomorrow, we lose the leverage that we have here with at least two senators in order to pass the more important reconciliation bill, which will deal with the crisis in childcare. It will make community colleges tuition-free. It will lower the cost of prescription drugs. It'll end the disgrace of us being the only major country not to have paid family and medical leave. And something that I have been working on, it'll expand Medicare so that we will finally cover the dental needs of seniors, hearing aids, and eyeglasses, among other things. And on top of all of that, it will be the most significant legislation to deal with the crisis of climate.
So just playing this out, you talk about the two senators. I assume you're talking about Manchin and Sinema. What then does this force them to do? If it goes down tomorrow, what does that time buy you?
Well, what it buys us is both of them work very hard, and I respect that, on the infrastructure bill. They want it passed. I want it passed. But what it says now is we are joined at the hip. And as you will remember, at the beginning of this whole process, what the president and Senator Schumer and Congresswoman, House Speaker Pelosi said, we're going forward in tandem. Both bills are going forward together. That's the way this process started, and that is what we have got to do. And I think at the end of the day, we will succeed, and the American people will be very, very happy. And I want to make this point. Some people say, well, it's a very expensive bill. This bill, if I have anything to say about it, will be 100% paid for by ending the tax breaks and the loopholes that the wealthy and large corporations now are able to enjoy. We're going to end those, and we're going to lower the cost of prescription drugs by having Medicare negotiate prescription drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry.
So Senator Manchin, he's insisting he's not changing his mind before tomorrow. He put out the statement today, which reads in part, while I am hopeful that common ground can be found that would result in another historic investment in our nation, I cannot and will not support trillions in spending or an all or nothing approach that ignores the brutal fiscal realities our nation faces. There's a better way, and I believe that we can find it if we're willing to continue to negotiate in good faith. So he also said today he could be open to a reconciliation bill by the end of the year. So essentially you're saying if this thing dies tomorrow, you're in a sense kind of calling his bluff, and now he's really got to negotiate because he doesn't have the bill he wants.
I wouldn't say calling his bluff, but also, again, I want to reiterate, when Senator Manchin or anyone else talks about the spending in this bill, it must be pointed out that this is going to be paid for. This is not adding to the debt.
Isn't, though, I mean, you need Senator Manchin to get the spending package passed. Isn't something better than nothing? I mean, it's kind of a high wire act you're playing, isn't it?
Well, when you deal, Anderson, the existential threat of climate, and the scientists tell us we have a handful of years in order to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel. That's a high wire act. I think it is morally irresponsible, inconceivable, that this country is not leading the world in cutting carbon emissions and taking on the fossil fuel industry. And I should also add, as part of this whole thing, please understand that we are now taking on the pharmaceutical industry. They don't want to see lower drug prices. The healthcare industry, they don't want to see Medicare expanded. Taking on the fossil fuel industry. We're taking on the very rich and their lobbyists who don't want to pay more in taxes. This is a very consequential struggle, but at the end of the day, I think we're going to win this.
Have you spoken to Senator Manchin or Senator Sinema privately? Do you know what exactly they want when it comes to an actual number on the spending package? Because they seem to be very vague on that.
That's part of the problem. Is, when you're negotiating, you come forward. You tell me what you want. This is what I want. Let's see how we work it out. But I think there has been a lot of frustration with both of those senators in that they have not come forward and said, this is what I want. This is what my concern has been. They have talked in vague terms, but we haven't seen the specifics that we need.
So you really don't know specifically what Sinema or Manchin want?
That is correct.
So, just looking at this from the outside, Democrats have the Senate, the House, and the White House. Some might look at that and say, wow, that seems pretty dysfunctional. Does the party bear some responsibility that everybody hasn't been able to come to a compromise?
Well, look, we have control over the Senate. That's correct. But I hope everybody understands it is a 50-50 split with the vice president casting the deciding vote. We have control over the House. Nancy Pelosi has a margin of 3 or 4 votes. So it is very, very tight. I think my frustration, Anderson, is not necessarily the views of Mr. Manchin or Ms. Sinema. It is that when you got 48 people on one side and the American people overwhelmingly on the same side, and 1 or 2 people on the other side, it is not appropriate, I think, for those couple of people to slow down progress. They have a right to be heard. They have a right to, get concessions. That's what the process is. But, any member of the Democratic caucus, myself, anybody else, I believe in a Medicare for all single-payer program. I think the current healthcare system is dysfunctional. I could go to Chuck Schumer tomorrow and say, Chuck, I'm not voting for that bill unless you have Medicare for all. But that's not what the caucus wants. That would be irresponsible. So I think at the end of the day, we are going to have to come together, do what the American people want, and tell the American people this government is capable of standing up to powerful special interests and represent working families.
I'm going to ask you a question I don't really like asking because it's just about politics and not about what actually really matters, which is, as you said, the climate change and health care for people. But if this doesn't get done, are you worried from a political standpoint that hurts the Democrats in the midterm elections?
This will get done, and I think it will be a real... Look, right now, we have, through the American Rescue Plan, been able to cut childhood poverty in half, more than half, because we are providing a $300 a month payment to working parents. It would be unthinkable to end that program and raise childhood poverty in America. What we are doing is enormously popular, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, demanding that the rich start paying their fair share of taxes, finally creating millions of jobs dealing with climate change. These are enormously popular issues. Rebuilding the infrastructure, very popular. So we have the agenda that the American people want. And what we are not talking about enough, Anderson, we're talking about Senators Manchin and Sinema. We're not talking about the fact there's not one Republican in the House or Senate prepared to stand up to the greed of the drug companies and lower the cost of prescription drugs. Not one Republican prepared to deal with the crisis of climate. That really is quite amazing to my mind.
Well, the irony, of course, and it's not even ironic, it's just sad, is that the parties have changed, and therefore they were fine having the floodgates of spending open under the Trump administration. They're not under a Democrat.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It was okay for the Republicans to use reconciliation to provide some $2 trillion unpaid for in tax breaks for the wealthiest people in this country. That was fine. But when we are providing dental care and hearing aids for seniors, when we are addressing the crisis of climate, when we are going to make sure that families in America don't have to pay more than 7% of their income for child care, when we're going to provide increased home health care, oh, that's terrible, we can't afford it. And by the way, something else. The military budget is now going to be somewhere around $770, $780 billion. Over a 10-year period, that is more than double what the reconciliation bill will be. And yet I hear very little discussion about throwing money at the military-industrial complex.